Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to the November 27th, 2018 hearings before the Baltimore Municipal and Zoning Appeals Board. A few preliminary items before we get started. Please turn off all cell phones. Either turn them off or turn them to vibrate. And if you want to have a conversation with any of your neighbors, please take it out into the hallway. I mention this because the proceedings today are being recorded, and conversations and buzzing cell phones are disruptive to not only the proceedings here, but also the recordings. Today, we don't have any postponements. Generally, we're going to call the cases as they appear on the docket list that's posted outside on the doorway. When we call your case, the appellant will stand to my left. Anybody in opposition will stand to my right. The appellant will present his or her case. The opposition will have the opportunity to address what the appellant provides in terms of testimony and evidence, and then the appellant will have the ability to close the hearing, and that will end the hearing. We will vote today on the appeals heard at the end of the docket, and anyone who wishes to stay can certainly stay and hear our decisions. Otherwise, you can call the office tomorrow and get our decision, and that number, and I'll read this twice so you have the opportunity to write it down, is 410-396-4301. And again, the phone number is 410-396-4301. Please do not build in Baltimore City without the proper permits. The written decision from this board will be issued in approximately 2 to 3 weeks. I want to address, there's several cases that have opposition signed in, and I'd like to address those preliminarily. We have found that if people have the opportunity to talk, sometimes that resolves the issues. So we want to give everyone that opportunity. I note that while we do encourage this dialogue, the board will make its decisions based upon the provisions of the zoning code. So when I call your name, you don't have to come up, just stand up. 2018-158, 2200 Huntington Avenue, Robert Brathurst. Who's in opposition? Oh, there you are. Have you all had the chance to talk? Would you like to talk a little more?
Yes.
Please take.
We'd like to speak to the board, not to.
Oh, so you don't want to discuss?
We've discussed many times.
Okay, that's fine. It's your decision. Next case for opposition is 2018-387, 314 South Washington Street, Davis Tobash. Oh, there you are. Who's in opposition? You are. Have you guys had a chance to talk?
No, we have not.
You have not? Would you like to?
Yeah.
Just go outside, and when you finish, just come back in, and we'll call your case. And the last case for which opposition is signed in is 2018-388, 3415 Holmes Avenue, Vernon Holmes. Opposition? You're in opposition? Yeah. Have you all had the chance to talk?
No. You go in the hall?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. We have one other preliminary matter, and that's a posting issue, and I will ask you to come up. This is 2018-386, 420 South Crescent Street, Michael Farakis. Come on up. We have some evidence that the property was not posted properly, which means we cannot hear this today. So what you'll need to do is to repost in accordance with the code. You can talk to Mr. Baumgartner if you need any assistance with posting requirements. And once it's reposted and the time frame runs, then we can hear your appeal.
Can we discuss the posting issue at all?
Sure.
So this posting required 3 signs. All 3 were posted and 1 was removed. So the signs were still available for the community to see on 2 of the 3 frontages. We believe that the sign may have been removed possibly. I understand that the neighborhood provided photographic evidence that the sign was down, and we acknowledge that the sign did come down. But there was still opportunity for the neighborhood to view these signs on the 2 other frontages.
Mr. Baumgartner, what do we have?
Yes, I'm Alexandra Bull. I'm a representative of T-Mobile. Bull.
Was the date changed on the signs from November 26th to the 27th?
Yes, it was. We were originally provided with the information that it was going to be on the 26th. Once we realized that that error had been made, we sent someone out to revise the sign.
So the reason why the sign that was on the ground is the 26th, it could have been taken down prior to that being discovered?
Right.
Is that, okay.
And you said there was 2 other signs?
Yes, the property has 3 frontages, so we posted 3 signs. And then, like I said, once the error was realized that we were provided with the wrong date, we updated the signs as soon as we found out.
Okay, let me poll the board. I'm okay with hearing this case. How about the board members? Okay, we'll call you in turn.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, next we're going to call cases which we call our consent docket. And these are cases for which we have information sufficient enough to approve your appeal. So when I call your case number, start at my left and just line up down the days, please. First one is 2018-281, 3309 Liberty Heights Avenue, Carlton Gilbert.
Excuse me.
Next case, 2018-364, 1712 Eastern Avenue, Bianca Abreu. Yeah, just stay here and we'll line up everybody down this way. Next is 2018-375, 2821 East Northern Parkway, Geraldo Perez. (2018-378, 3204 East Baltimore Street, Rosa Carchipula. I'm sure I murdered that name. 2018-382, 4710 to 4714 Pennington Avenue, Amanda Memel. 2018-383, 2108 to 2126 Boston Street, Ryan Fitzgerald. Okay. And finally, 2018-392, 700 East Pratt Street, Davis Karcheski. Okay, let me, Em, are you here for?
Liberty Heights?
Okay, okay. Are you in opposition?
No.
Okay, okay. All right, let me get everyone who's going to provide testimony sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, first case, 2018-281, 3309 Liberty Heights Avenue.
Sir.
You stand up to the mic. You state your name for the record, please.
My name is Tucker Lahr, last name spelled L-A-H-R, and I'm here on behalf of T-Mobile, who's the applicant.
And Mr. Lahr, we have this to install a new rooftop telecom facility, 9 antennas and 1 microwave dish with rooftop and on-grade equipment. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir.
Do we have any staff reports?
Yes, thank you. Martin French for the Baltimore City Planning Department. The Planning Department recommends approval of this application subject to these conditions. The antennas and related equipment must be painted to match the building to ensure they are visually unobtrusive when viewed from across the street. The panel antennas and related equipment will remain mounted as illustrated in the plans and elevations submitted to and approved by planning, and the applicant will adequately mitigate any adverse effect as specified in the report of the Historical and Architectural Preservation Division of the Department of Planning in accordance with that report's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
Just note that Ms. Bradford's here to show her support for this appeal.
Yeah, I'm from the Forest Park Neighborhood Association, where the tenants will be, and we wanted everyone to know that we are for it.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Lahr, are the planning conditions acceptable to you?
They are, yes, sir.
Zoning Board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
2018-364, 1712 Eastern Avenue.
Yes.
Hi, state your name, please.
Bianca Abreu, A-B-R-E-U.
Ms. Abreu, we have this to use portion of first floor as permanent makeup studio, including microblading. Is that
Yes, correct.
Great. Staff reports?
Yes. Department of Planning has reviewed this application and noted this property is located in the Fells Point Historic District. Therefore, any exterior changes, including any signage, are subject to review and approval by the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation. The Department of Planning recommends approval of the application, subject to the condition that all exterior changes, including additions, demolitions, alterations, and signage, are completed or installed in accordance with an authorization to proceed issued by the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation. Thank you.
Great. And Ms. Abreu, do you accept the conditions from the Planning Department?
Yes.
And there's one final condition I want to discuss with you and see if you're in agreement, that we would impose a condition that the facility not be used for what are normally called tattoos.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
It's only permanent makeup.
Okay.
That's it. No tattoos.
With those conditions, zoning board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you.
Thank you.
2018-375, 2821 East Northern Parkway. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
State your name, please.
Jim Garner.
And Mr. Garner, we have this to construct one-story side addition. Is that correct?
Somewhat. The addition's already there. We're just
Okay.
converting it from screens to glass and screen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But the foundation, roof, and everything's already in place.
Okay. Staff reports?
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add?
That's it.
Great. Zoning board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal.
Thank you very much.
2018-378, 3204 East Baltimore Street. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just state your name, please.
Rosa Carchipulia.
Thank you. And we have this to use portion as a nail salon. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do we have staff reports?
Yes, Planning Department has no objection to this application. Thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes. Well, I just want to put a nail, like a nail salon. So if I can set up like for waxing too, that's it.
Okay. Zoning board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next, 2018-382, 4710 to 4714 Pennington Avenue. Hi.
Hello.
Could you state your name, please?
Erin Allison.
Okay. And we have this to use portion of community center for retail sales of wellness products. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Staff reports?
Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that this property is located in the Brooklyn and Curtis Bay Business Area Urban Renewal Plan area. The department therefore is obligated to review any exterior alterations to the property. The department recommends approval of the application be subject to the condition that any signs installed on the property to inform the public of the additional use be designed and installed in accordance with plans approved by the Department of Planning. Thank you.
Good. And is that acceptable to you?
It is.
Good. Anything you'd like to add?
Not at this time.
Great. Zoning board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is 2018-383, 2108 to 2126 Boston Street. Okay,
Hi.
state your name, please.
Tucker Lahr, again, last name spelled L-A-H-R.
Okay, and we have this to install rooftop telecom facility, 9 antennas and 1 microwave dish with rooftop equipment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Staff, anything from the staff?
Yes. One moment, please.
We're moving too quickly for you today.
Fumbling for the page. Yes, here we go. Okay, yes. Planning Department has reviewed this application, noted that this is in the Canton Waterfront Urban Renewal Plan area, and therefore the department must approve specific alterations to the exterior of the property. The department recommends approval of the application subject to these conditions. The antennas and related equipment must be painted to match the building to ensure they're visually unobtrusive. The panel antennas and related equipment will remain mounted as illustrated in the plans and elevations submitted to planning, and the applicant will adequately mitigate any adverse effect as specified in the report of the Historical and Architectural Preservation Division of the Department of Planning in accordance with that report's recommendations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Lahr, are those conditions acceptable to you?
They are, sir.
Great. Zoning board having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, 700 East, 2018-392, 700 East Pratt Street. State your name, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. David Karseski for the applicant.
And Mr. Krasowski, we have this to install 418 square foot 12th floor rooftop sign facing either Pratt Street or Marketplace. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Any staff reports?
Just note a letter of support in the file from Councilman Eric Costello.
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add?
Only to provide you a copy of a letter of support from the Downtown Partnership.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Zoning Board, having reviewed your appeal, we have sufficient information to approve your appeal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start on our regular docket now. First case, 2018-158, 2200 Huntington Avenue, Robert Brathurst. Yes.
Are you guys just staying?
So the opposition will be on this side. The opponent, you know where you're going.
But they were over here. I didn't want to kick them out on my seats.
Okay, let's get everybody sworn in who's going to provide testimony.
All right, raise your right hands, please. Sir, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yeah. Mr. Bear, are you presenting?
In a minute.
Okay.
I'm not Mr. Bathurst. My name is Jennifer Bussey.
Thank you.
I'm here on behalf of Bob. I'm with the firm Whiteford, Taylor & Preston. Thank you for having me today. I'm here on behalf of BGE with regard to their petition for a variance to replace an existing fence.
And before you get started, I want to ask if we have any staff reports.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, there's a letter of opposition from the Greater Remington Improvement Association. It's a little bit of a lengthy letter and pretty poignant to the degree of their opposition. But rather than read the letter in its entirety, there's a representative from the Community Association here, and he will testify.
Okay.
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
Okay. And we have this to increase height of the fence around electrical substation to 12 feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Please.
Okay, great, thank you. If it pleases the court, I'd like to make a brief opening statement, and then I have two witnesses. So again, my name is Jennifer Bussey. I'm here with the firm Whiteford, Taylor & Preston on behalf of BGE. They do own this substation that is at the center of this, and it is called their center substation. And it is located at 2200 Huntington Avenue in the Remington area. The other street that it's bound by is 22nd Street. What's the purpose of this appeal is that, again, we do need to replace the existing fence. It currently, as you will hear from my witnesses, currently varies in height, and what we are looking for is to have a 12-foot high fence. The substation itself, as you'll hear Mr. Comfer from BGE explain, is an important substation to the company. Again, it's called the center substation for a reason. It's a critical hub. It is an important chain in the link, essentially, as to the operations. It's not just a distribution substation, but it's also a transmission substation. And BG has been directed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to address physical security threats and vulnerabilities, and thus the need to increase the height of the fence at this asset.
Has FEMA mandated a 12-foot high fence?
The standard that FERC has directed is a 12-foot high fence, yes. So, again, we're here for that variance. Again, the current height, as you'll hear, of the fence, it varies. It's currently a chain link fence, and the fence that they are proposing is what's called a palisade-style fence. As part of this, the company decided to reach out to the community. They met with two different groups, GRIA being one of the groups. The communications started in January with regard to the fence, and I have no doubt that you'll hear that the community's not happy with how that all went. Definitely lessons were learned. It was not perfect in its execution, and you know, again, I think while it wasn't perfect, it definitely laid a foundation for future communications. At the end of the day, GRIA, I'm sure you will hear, I have not read the letter in its entirety, but I understand that there's a letter that identifies what they're asking for. The company did try to work with them on all fronts and is willing to continue to work with them, but it did come to a point where we recognized that we needed to move forward because the mandate to install the fence has a deadline. There is a time in which it has to be installed. So what I'm sure that you'll hear is that they're asking for a few things that the company cannot provide. And Mr. Comfort can and will testify to it in more detail, but essentially a brick wall is one of the things that they're asking for. And it's not feasible due to the ductwork underground and the fact that of what is involved in the engineering of that kind of wall. Secondly, the community is looking for parking along the substation side of Huntington Avenue. And as Mr. Comfort will explain, it's just critical that both ways of access be maintained in the event of an outage so that they can bring in what they call a mobile transformer, thank you. And so they have to maintain those both points of access and, make sure that they can get that in there within 24 hours. And then, of course, the street would have to be closed, actually, and the other side cleared to get the old piece of equipment out and the new piece of equipment in. So, again, the process wasn't perfect. There was information that, probably wasn't fleshed out before shared, and I think it created some confusion and some frustration. But at the end of the day, BG is willing to continue to work with the community and try their best to make them happy. And with that, I believe I can go ahead and call my first witness.
One quick question, again, just following up on my first question. Is the type of fence mandated by FERC?
There are actually two options, and the company did show the community both options. I have pictures I'd like to submit into evidence that'll show you those. But the one that the community indicated a preference for is the one that BG is proposing.
Okay.
Is there parking now available on the
So there is currently parking. The substation essentially, as I said, kind of fronts on both Huntington and 22nd. And the parking that exists on 22nd is meter spaces along the substation side with parking on the other side as well. What the community is looking for is parking on both sides of Huntington. And there's currently only parking on the restaurant side and the non-substation side of Huntington.
So asking for something that doesn't currently exist?
It does not currently exist. I understand that they think it did used to exist. I don't know when that happened. The substation has been in existence since 1950s, and it's clearly marked, so that parking does not exist. If you give me 1 second, make sure I did not miss anything. Oh, sure. Thank you, yes. There's a few other things that you'll hear brought up is that the community would love access to be permanently or for there only to be access to the substation from 23rd. And that's not physically possible for when they bring in pieces of equipment. On a day-to-day basis, though, the company has already undertaken the initiatives to push the communication down to all the crews that there is absolutely, that they should be using 23rd on a day-to-day basis for the smaller trucks. But they do need to maintain Huntington for larger pieces of equipment. And then lastly, one thing that the company offered, and they're willing to continue to work with GRIA and whoever in the neighborhood is interested, is some landscaping to soften the look. Again, we are going from chain link to what I'll show you in pictures is called a palisade-style fence, but the company has offered planters that can be placed along Huntington that in the event of an outage, they will be able to pick up and move. It's very complicated with regard to what can be planted, unfortunately, in that what can be planted needs to not be climbable, basically. You have to be able to keep people from trying to jump the fence. So, but again, the company is very willing to work with the community and has been, in talks about what kind of plantings could go in the planters. Thank you for your time. Again, I have two witnesses. Mr. John Comfort of BGE would be my first witness.
I'm John Comfort, last name Compher. I've been with Baltimore Gas and Electric for 29 years, serving primarily in the substation and construction and maintenance area. And I'm a manager currently of that area.
Mr. Comfer, if you could, and I appreciate that brief intro to what you do at BGE. How long did you say you've been at the company?
29 years.
Okay. And on a day-to-day basis, what are your duties at the company?
I manage crews that maintain the facilities, substation facilities. Currently, I believe it's 260 of them statewide. And we do build-outs of brownfield existing substation.
Okay. Are you fluent with this center substation?
I am.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
It's an older station. I think you mentioned that in your statement, 1955. We do have some newer equipment in there that is, I believe, 1970 vintage equipment.
Okay. Does it encompass approximately 4.5 acres in size?
Sounds about right. Mm-hmm.
And does it include transformers?
It does,
Okay.
yes.
And can you tell us about what happens in the event of an outage?
If we were to lose one of those transformers, that puts us in a lack of redundant supply, leaving us exposure to some critical customers in the area. And in the event that we had to replace that unit, we would have to break the unit down, a very large unit. We would have to remove the old unit and then bring a new unit in to replace the existing unit.
Okay, and what kind of truck brings in the mobile unit?
It's what we call a low boy. A low boy is a very low hauling device, a hauling trailer to haul such a large piece of equipment. And then it would be transferred by crane into the yard and then what they call jack and rolled.
Okay. Do you know the wheelbase of the truck that would bring in the mobile unit?
I think of a mobile unit, I think it's about 65 to 75 feet.
Okay. And,
That's without a tractor.
okay. Okay. And are you aware there's currently access to the substation both from Huntington and 23rd Street?
I am.
And is it important to maintain both of those, and if so, why?
It is. In the event that we were left in a single contingent, 23rd or 22nd, that could present a problem, given wherever the failure would occur, and our ability to access appropriately.
And the mobile transport, the mobile transformer, it's fairly heavy, I'm thinking.
It's very heavy,
Okay.
yeah.
I believe you were explaining to me, so if you could explain to the board, that because of the weight, are you restricted on how you can come in if there's been road work done?
Steel plating, yeah, we wouldn't be able to cross steel plating. If there was damage to the road, failure of a water main, something of that nature, if there was steel plating down, we would not be able to cross over that with that particular unit.
So do you feel strongly then that it's a benefit and it's needed to have 2 points of access, you know, that you can't always be restricted to coming down, for example, either from 23rd or from 22nd?
I do believe it
Okay.
would be a benefit, yeah, remain a benefit.
Okay. Back to you a little bit, and I apologize we got off track.
Sure.
I do have Mr. Comfer's resume, and I'd like to submit that to the board. Okay. I apologize, I have copies of everything else, but only one of those.
You guys seen this?
Nothing.
I'd like to ask the board to recognize his expertise in substation engineering and maintenance.
I think we can as you know, this is not a judicial court, and our standards are not quite that of a judicial court, but yes, we would recognize that expertise.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Comfer, we've discussed the substation in part with regard to its importance. Are you able to mention any of the customers that are very important, just to give a sense of the area and the value that the substation brings to the electrical system?
Without going into great detail, there's television stations, there's radio stations, there's hospitals, there's local government.
Okay, thank you. And we've discussed in the event of an outage briefly, access points. What about physically getting the equipment in and out? Have you been involved in the analysis, or are you aware of analysis that the company directed an outside firm to do to evaluate how equipment would get in and out with regard to the turning radiuses?
I am.
And so did the company hire an outside consultant?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you know what they evaluated, meaning if they could come in from certain directions and what it would take with regard to the width of the road that would be needed to turn in and out?
I believe that they were a little bit short on their widths.
Okay. Did the analysis show that they cannot compromise the width they have and allow parking on both sides?
I do believe.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. I believe you're aware that as part of this process, BG engaged in communications with the community and that they've asked for some improvements.
Mhm.
Are you aware that they asked for a brick wall running down Huntington
I am aware
instead of a
that.
fence?
I am aware of that.
Can you explain the reasons why their brick wall is not feasible?
There are underground facilities that leave the station, obviously. Everything is underground that leaves there. Constructing a brick wall around that existing infrastructure would be very extensive and could potentially create inadvertent issues related to the current infrastructure. And it would require road closures and things like that because of the width of a foundation like that.
So is it accurate to say that while you have some drawings showing the locations of existing underground dump banks?
Excuse me. Previously, did you say extensive or expensive?
Extensive.
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 Okay, thank you.
So is it true that while there's drawings showing the locations, that until you get in there, you're not really sure the depth always, or the width, or how those duct banks run?
No, that has to be discovered via hydro excavation, which is a vacuum process, test pitting, things like that.
Is it mainly conduit running under the ground?
It could be conduit, it could be direct buried cable.
Okay.
I have a question. Are there any of the other substations? Do any of them have such a brick wall?
They do. We have several that were constructed. The wall was constructed as part of the station.
I see. None came after an existing substation?
No, they were in conjunction.
And on that point, are you aware that the community has pointed out to the company the existence of, for example, I think Paca Street, is that one that has a brick wall?
It does.
Okay.
Mhm.
Can you just expound a little bit more about why that can have a brick wall?
It was designed at the same time that the build-out of the substation occurred.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
part of the design. We have several others.
Okay. Are you also aware that in response to concerns raised by the community on noise, that the company did a study to see how much noise was emitted from the station?
I'm aware of the study, but not aware of the emissions.
Okay. Are you aware that they are proposing to mitigate the sound in response to
I
concerns
am
raised?
aware of that.
Are you aware of what that will involve? What, if it involves a wall, for example, a sound wall?
I'm told that that's
Okay.
what it is, a sound wall. That's typically what we would do.
Okay, can you explain why, in case it's confusing to some, why the company can install a sound wall inside the substation, but not the brick wall that we previously, touched upon?
Sure, it's within the footprint of the substation.
Is it the same type of wall?
No, it's not. No, it's a cinder block wall.
Okay.
Why doesn't the concrete block wall interfere with whatever's beneath the surface?
We would typically build around that. The foundation is not nearly as, the weight of the cinder is not nearly as extensive as what would be proposed on the outside of the substation and the things that actually leave the substation, what we would actually have to build around each of the utilities that leave the station.
Thank you very much. I do have another witness who would like to speak about that sound wall with a little more detail. He was involved directly with that study, if that's okay.
Mhm.
So with that, I think I'm finished with Mr. Comfort.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want- Thank you, Chuck. If you could
Okay.
state your name.
Yes, I'm Charles Rayburn. I'm a BGE contractor. I work for a company, Burns and McDonnell. We're under contract to build that noise reduction wall, that sound wall, and we're also under contract to install a fence.
Great, thank you. Can you, let's go ahead and finish up the comments on the sound wall first. Explain what is
Yes.
proposed to mitigate the noise.
The sound wall is a barrier near the source, which is a transformer. It will require piers, or essentially like a large post hole, piers, and a precast wall that's between support poles. I'll say it that way. We do not have to have a continuous footer foundation for that. To correct, it's not cinder block. That's not what we're planning. You're familiar with these as what you see around highways. So you'll have a pier and you'll have a slide-in precast wall.
Thank you. And maybe since you're here and you have all the knowledge on the fence as well, since you are in charge of that, can you give a little more background about the fence that's going to be installed?
Okay, the fence is, John mentioned, we will use a process of excavating, which is called hydrovac. We will vacuum out material. We will pour a foundation for the post, and we'll have cross beams and put the fence material. The standard per FERC and their standards is that 12-foot height, and we typically use a type of fence which we will use. That type we'll call Beta. That's really the manufacturer's name. It's a Beta Guardian 7000 is the product, and it is a non-climbable fence, and that's the key to the type of fence per FERC's standards. That fence will go the backside along the cab company back to the B&O right-of-way, or the railroad right-of-way, and up behind the Roland Slate Company. And then we would upgrade that fence to the Palisade style that some people call the embassy style fencing, that would be on the front side and down the corner where there are residences and businesses. So that's
Thank you.
basically it.
I apologize, I may not have done the best job of doing this in order, but I do have a pack of photos for everybody, and I would like to use Mr. Rayburn to get the photographs in. Is it okay if I
Okay.
pass everyone the packet? Okay. Here's one for you guys if you like one, yeah. Here's 5. And I have one more I can give to the board, but I'm just going to use that first. Mr. Rayburn, if I could use your help, please, in identifying some photographs. Oh, you did, okay. Start with the
Okay.
first one. What is this aerial that you see here?
This is the aerial that takes in the Remington neighborhood where the center substation is, sort of generally bounded by the Jones Falls Expressway, the B&O rail right-of-way. It's north above North Street, or North Avenue, and up there, yeah, I think you can make out Huntington Avenue. Yes, between 22nd and 23rd.
Maybe if I could ask you, just since I don't have an easel type thing, just to point to where the substation is for everyone's benefit.
No, I need.
Here, you know, we can
Yeah,
go to the next one.
I'm better off looking at it
Yeah.
there, but this
Go to
one
the
blows
second.
it up, and you can see the, right in the center here, Huntington Avenue, 23rd Street on the north, and down to the yellow checker cab company, which is just above 21st Street. So, yeah, where I mentioned 22nd doesn't really carry through to the station, but I'm going to say somewhere about 21st and a half is the boundary between the cab company and the substation.
Thank you. So on this second sheet, are you able to pick out where actual, you know, the transformers are on the site?
There are the four large, not to get too technical, but 110 kV or kilovolt transformers. They are up here. I don't know. Can you see four squares that are up towards Huntington Avenue? That's some transformers there. There are some smaller ones on the backside. It's a odd-shaped parcel here because we've leased out, or BGE's leased out, a storage yard to the cab company that cuts into the property there.
Let's go ahead, if you would. We'll use the third aerial, and if you could explain in more detail the actual site.
This clearly shows the transformers that are those four squares sitting on concrete pads up front towards Huntington. One of those is the size of those are approximately 20 feet tall. John, what would you say? About 15 feet by 15 or 15 by 20? Yeah. So it is, our source of noise is the one that's closest to the front gate that's across from the residences, which is mid-block there on Huntington. So there will be a sound wall built on two sides around that transformer there to mitigate that noise.
How high will the sound wall be?
It'll be, I think, 24 feet.
Oh, so it's higher than the transformer?
It's higher than a transformer. Yeah, and, you know, think about sound like light. We have to push it back to the source so it doesn't get to the second story of the homes across the street.
So up to this point, there's been no barrier?
There's been no barrier. I can't speak to this other than within the last year, as a contractor, we were made aware through the interactions with the community groups that there was a noise complaint. That noise complaint for BGE oftentimes comes through the city, and then the city would do something in regards to that. In this case, we heard the complaint, and we went out and hired a company, AECom, to do a sound study, and they did find that at nighttime, it is several decibels above the limit for nighttime noise.
Okay, so back to the station itself. Explain what, for example, at the corner of 23rd and Huntington, what those two buildings are right here.
Those are equipment housings. Yeah, they're breakers in there that are, large. Large breakers, large switches to open and close circuits.
And then you were talking about the irregular shape of the property. You touched upon how it fronts on 23rd for a small amount. What is directly, is there a gate on 23rd? And if so, maybe using this third aerial, where is that?
Let's see. At where 23rd Street is labeled, just beyond the ST, there is a small gate that enters in. There's a slight discoloration across the sidewalk, and that's the entrance to that gate. You can see that it is a relatively narrow gate and a narrow roadway between electrical equipment in there.
And then what is this use right here next to this substation?
Oh, this is the Roland Slate Company. That's for slate roofing.
That's
That-
not part of
That's
the
not
property.
BG, no.
And then back in here, is this? area
This
back?
is part of BGE's property. This is really distribution, transformers, distribution equipment back in here.
And all
Um,
these cars, is that what you were referring to?
This is leased property to Yellow and Checker Cab Company, and they put buses and cabs down in there periodically.
Would you explain what all the lines are near the transformers? What are all those?
Those are essentially bus bars. They're electrical conductors.
And then Chuck, if I could use you to go through the rest of these pictures, moving on to the first. in a series.
This is
Wait,
existing.
Hold on 1 second. If you look at, let's look back to the cover page. I'm identifying photos 4 through 7. Would you read what that is there?
4 through 7 views from Huntington Avenue running north to south
Are you sure?
toward the corner.
Running what?
Running south to north. My apologies. Running south to north toward the corner of 23rd
Okay.
Street.
So looking first at photo 4.
Photo 4, you'll see vehicles. That's the entrance to the Yellow and Checker Cab Company. This runs up Huntington. You can see through the tree there, the substation.
And then on the next
Now the
photo?
next one up is showing the existing chain link fence and some of the electrical equipment to the left of the road, and further up those buildings we talked about having switches in. And you begin to see the residential stretch that I believe is 10 residential properties.
Is the next photo a
It's-
photo of the gate on Huntington?
Yes,
Identifying the
this is a little further up. This is what we would call the main gate to the center substation.
Can you see a transformer in this picture?
Yes, and that is the transformer that will have a barrier built around the two sides that you can see here.
Is there, are there plans to, as to the facade of this sound wall?
That sound wall will match the existing brick of the buildings that house the electrical equipment.
And the building to which you refer, is that on the next
That's,
page?
well, that's on this next page, and you can see it to the left on the other side of the chain link and the barbed wire.
Is this a restaurant on the right?
Up on the right is, I think that's Clavel, the restaurant on the corner.
And then, for the next photo, let me just flip back again to the cover. So then, for photo
Photo
8,
View looking west, down 23rd Street from the corner of 23rd and Huntington.
okay.
So this is, you were just sort of outside of Clavel, which is on the left. You see one of the brick buildings that houses electrical equipment inside the fence. Slightly further down, you see a building that is the Roland Slate Company.
Is this next photo going the opposite direction, looking down 23rd with the station on the right?
Yes, it is.
Excuse me, counsel. Can you tell me what photo you're on
Yes,
presently?
I apologize that
Yeah.
that would be photo 9.
Photo 9.
I'm sorry, show me the picture because I
Yeah.
aren't numbered.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, I got lost in the next.
No,
in
I
the next.
apologize.
Now, this view is looking back east, I believe, up 23rd Street. To the right is the smaller gate that is the entrance to the center substation from 23rd Street. And this looks further up towards Howard.
Can you see the meter parking on this?
Yes, on the
South side of
right-hand
23rd?
side, there is some metered parking outside the substation.
Changing over to the next photo, these will be existing conditions with photo simulations, is that correct?
Yes. So the next photo in the series is the existing, looking from 23rd Street down Huntington Avenue towards the cab company. On the right-hand side are those brick buildings that house electrical equipment.
Is the chain link fence visible?
Yes, you can see that.
Is there barbed wire on top?
Yes, there's barbed wire on top.
On the next sheet, does this show the simulation of the Palisades fence?
Yes, this is the Palisade-style, embassy-style fence that we're proposing to put along Huntington, and that's stretched down 23rd.
Is there barbed wire on top?
No, there is not barbed wires and not a need on this style.
In the next photo, is there a simulation showing planters?
Yes, we have engaged in conversations that some residents expressed a desire to have some kind of planting along the road. We have proposed planter boxes because they would be removable by large forklifts if we have the need to. Mr. Confer mentioned the turning radius of large trucks, and in the past, they've had to take down sections of fence, and we would have to remove the planter boxes, and we might have to remove sections of fence in order to get large equipment in.
Looking at the next photo, can you describe what this is? It has the no stopping.
Yes,
sign.
that's the side of the street across from the residences on Huntington, looking straight into the substation.
So this is existing conditions, correct?
Yes, the chain link fence.
And then in the
And
next,
then the next photo is the simulation showing a 12-foot high Palisade-style fence that we've proposed.
but you can still see the no stopping sign. However, do you see the equipment behind the Palisades fence to the same extent as you do in the existing conditions?
It obscures the view of the electrical equipment to a degree.
And what is the next photo?
That is the addition of planter boxes on the outside of the Palisades fence, which would be perhaps the final view.
Is BGE married to that exact type of plant in planter boxes?
No.
Okay.
No, we would like to work with the community to come up with the appropriate plantings, understanding that, as you mentioned previously, we cannot plant climbable species, climbable trees. It
Will
defeats-
BG&E maintain the plantings, water, cut, trim?
Yes.
What is the next photo?
Oh, the next photo is a photo of an existing project that we are completing at a BGE substation in Bowie, Maryland, in Prince George's County, using the 12-foot high Palisades fence.
So this is not a photo simulation?
No, this is
Purpose here is
an actual photo of a project that's being completed as we speak.
You mentioned that for the rear of the site and the side far from the residences, that the beta fence will be installed, is that correct?
Yeah, what we typically call beta fence is this last view. Everybody on this one? Yes, okay. That is the standard that we would use around substations to meet the FERC requirements. As I said, we've chosen to put the Palisades in for we believe, a nicer look along the roads in Huntington, along Huntington and 23rd. But this is the fence that will go from the backside, in other words, down the side, separating the substation from the cab company, around that storage yard, back along the border with the railroad right-of-way, up behind the Roll and Slate Company, and out towards that gate on 23rd Street.
Okay.
So the feds have mandated a 12-foot fence.
Yes.
And this Palisade style is one of how many options that you had?
We have two options at this point, which are the two I've shown you.
Okay. And that's a standard around the country?
That is basically a standard there, we call it beta fence, but that's the manufacturer. So you could go out and find that somebody else used something, and I don't know what the competing brand is, but that's, you'll see that throughout the country.
Thanks.
I think that would be it for Mr. Rayburn.
Okay.
Yeah,
If there's any other
thank you.
questions for him.
Have you finished your case, Ms. Busby?
So with that, I'd call Mr. Alberry. You could introduce yourself, Mr. Berry.
Yes, Al Berry, AB Associates. I'm here on behalf of the company as a planning consultant, expert in testimony regarding zoning matters, and I'm going to testify as to why this is a unique site, meets your qualifications for a variance.
First, maybe, Mr. Berry, would you like to explain your involvement in this process over the past many months?
Yes, this process started before I was involved, and becoming involved, I was asked to help the company give some advice as to the treatment of the fence, the style of the fence, the landscaping, and perhaps more importantly, involving the neighborhood and trying to discern what their interests would be and translating that into what we hoped would be a compromise. You've heard that two of the things that they were very much interested in, or three things actually. One was sound, which is being addressed by the company. One was removing access on a daily basis of many of the BG&E trucks that were using Huntington, which is across from some houses, and could easily be relocated because of their size, and it would be less of a nuisance to the neighbors, to 23rd Street. So that was accomplished. And then the last was landscaping issue that has yet to be finalized with the neighborhood, but the company is committed to it and will maintain it. And it's independent of the variance request, but it is certainly, it mitigates it, certainly in terms of the appearance.
Thank you. You mentioned that you were going to touch upon the uniqueness of the site. Would you like to go ahead and touch on that now?
Yes, I'd have to say that if you look at the zoning category of this, which is an industrial category, and compare it to the use that's there, this is not your normal industrial use that has flexibility in perhaps moving the fence further into the property. As you've heard, there's some practical difficulty in relocating what is a very substantial part of the company's electrical distribution for the station in and of itself. You've heard that the station serves over, I think, 40,000 customers, including hospitals, state office, government, the railroad.
Does it service the neighbors across the street?
Pardon?
Does it service the neighbors across the street?
Well, it serves the neighborhood for sure, including. And so the emergency here, and frankly, we took the community's concern about having some additional parking very seriously. We spent a lot of time with different engineers and using different types of wheelbases. It turns out that the last drawing that we shared with the neighborhood had a shorter wheelbase than what is actually needed for this low buoy delivery. And we looked at it from different types of entrances. You come from the north or come from the south. The turning radius one needs to get in the mobile transformer, which is, again, the one needed in an emergency. People's power go out, they want to get it back as soon as possible. The railroad has to operate, the hospital has to operate, any number of critical users, customers. So that's why the company feels strongly that having full-time parking along that side of Huntington, as much as we thought we might be able to accomplish it in part or completely, presents an operational problem for the trucks that have to get in there as quickly as possible to deliver this mobile unit. The larger unit, the final unit, we've recognized, the community pointed out, and the company has to close the street. We have to remove parking on both sides, but that's scheduled. It's not on an emergency basis. Company can't worry about 20 cars that might be at either for the restaurant or for living in the neighborhood, who knows, may be away, and having to take that responsibility when time is of the essence. So we've tried. We think we met the community, certainly in terms of aesthetics of the site, operationally moving to normal vehicles, which we did understand some complaints about noise and different hours of the night. We can move that away from the homes. But I think because of the relationship of this service center as part of the East Coast network, I mean, this is not just a distribution, it's providing power, and it's part of I think a hub is what the company calls it. Redundancy is important. That has to be maintained. There are all these federal standards for security now, which is leading to the request to replace the 8-foot fence with the 12-foot fence. We need a variance for that. I think the standard in and of itself in terms of the use of this facility is not your standard industrial property with flexibility. It's a unique situation, provides service to the citizens and companies of Baltimore, and we hope that you find that it is unique enough to grant the variance.
Just a couple more questions, and thank you. If the code were strictly followed, would there be an unnecessary hardship or practical difficulty?
I would think that the relocation of all of the duct bank, the utilities running underneath, the cables which are parallel to Huntington, and they're in between the buildings that you saw on the slide and the right-of-way, we can't put the fence back and expose that. There has to be something to secure that in and of itself, so it has to be at the property line. And the practical difficulty of, as you heard some testimony about having to close streets, bury it somewhere, maybe out in the street, there could be adages because of unexpected construction techniques. That wouldn't be fair either to the customers served by this. So I think it's a substantial hardship to have all of that looked at for the sake of a brick wall. And you can see there's a significant percentage of that frontage on Huntington that already has brick buildings over it. Brick wall in front of those buildings wouldn't necessarily accomplish anything, in my opinion. You're going to have the equipment that is the most massive in the back, to the extent that wanted to be shielded. Some people might like to look at it, but some people might not. That's going to be somewhat surrounded by 20 to 24-foot high sound barrier against it. And you've heard that can be done without the interference of the whole network of cables and utility duct banks that service the center.
Will the grant of the variance diminish or impair the property values in the neighborhood?
I would say that the replacement of a dilapidated, deteriorated chain link fence with barbed wire along Huntington 23rd with a very attractive fence with some landscaping would be an improvement over what's there today. So it would not diminish property values, in my opinion.
So would the grant of the variance promote the public interest and welfare?
Electricity is a part of our life, and I think the security necessary to maintain that, which is again mandated federally, would certainly enhance the quality of life of the section of the city, if not the whole city.
That's all my questions for Mr. Berry. I do have a document to turn in just to have in the file with regard to those standards.
Thank you.
And with that, we would rest our case in chief.
All right, let's hear from the opposition.
My name is Bill Cunningham. Another Bill Cunningham, I know that.
Real Bill.
Cunningham. The real Bill. You've heard the story. I'm on the board of the Greater Remington Improvement Association. I've done that for probably the past 10 years. I also have to acknowledge that I own 3 properties across the street from this facility, so I'm very familiar with it. We have wonderful people here, but unfortunately, we've had to deal with one of our worst neighbors, BG&E, who has totally been unresponsive to us through the years. Now we're so glad that this came up, so we're going to get some of the things we've been trying to get done for a long time, like quieting the noise down, which during the daytime is a lot louder than at night. We're going to possibly get them to maintain the property on the outside of the fence, which I've been trying to get done for years. You know, they don't want any trees growing now so that you can climb over. On their west side, the trees go up to the front fence line and over top of the fence, and the whole west side is nothing but a dump area that we have to deal with in our community. The noise from the employees, which Mary Ann will describe because she lives across the street, is sometimes she has to go out in her nightgown and deal with these guys out there making all this noise in the early morning hours.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
What kind of noise is being made? Is it attendant to the work that they're doing?
Their music, and they wait outside the gate to get in for some reason.
Idling the
actually.
So we've always, and Mary Ann has complained about that. She's complained about the noise that 8 years ago that came from these pieces of equipment. And the reason I bring this up is that I don't want you to think that we're dealing with a really nice company here. We aren't. You know, GRIA's always been the David, and now we're going up against a real Goliath. You know, we want to acknowledge that they're very powerful and very rich. But we also, I believe, we heard the word expensive. And I believe that's the true reason why we can't get, in other words, this doesn't,
I don't think the word was expensive.
I was saying the next one, I heard expensive, but maybe that's because that's what I wanted to hear. Yeah, this isn't pretty to look at. And that's why we did say, okay, if we're stuck with a metal fence because of the ability for that other fence, which looks like it might block your see-through, but it doesn't, that ability to be tagged, and we have a lot of tagging that goes on in our community, was a great concern to us. So, boy, Mary Ann came up with a great idea, and these gentlemen gave it to us. They're going to put a 24-foot high wall up in front of the noisemaker and do it without having to put large footers in. Why can't they put a 12-foot of the same material there? Why can't BG&E spend the money to put murals on that and beautify that? We're a transforming neighborhood. We're the most upcoming neighborhood, new neighborhood in the city of Baltimore. Auction today, exactly what the auctioneer said. That's what we are. Be a good neighbor. Spend the money. Beautify our neighborhood. We spend across the street in those 10, maybe more than that, 10 houses, we have all kinds of planter beds that were built there generations ago. I buy the plants, Mary Ann plants them and maintains them, and we have this flourishing garden in the middle of the city, one of the best looking blocks in the city, and what we get to look at across the street is not very pleasant. That's why we want a brick wall. We would even raise the funds to paint murals on the walls so the taggers wouldn't tag them, because the taggers are very respective of murals. You know, we would create a really nice looking facility there, and yet we get the answer, it's too expensive. I think it's too expensive is the real answer. We just landed something on Mars. We certainly can.
Well, I don't think BG&E is landing something on Mars.
I know, but
so
they certainly can figure out engineer-wise.
where we are here
I
today.
certainly think they can figure out engineering-wise how to build a wall there if it weren't for the expense.
Well, sir,
Yes.
a wall is something that you want, right? You want the neighborhood to be beautified.
Yes.
And from what I just heard, you want to thrust that obligation or the cost of what it is you'd like onto the company because they can do it?
Yes.
How would you feel if BGE just said, okay, you see the chain link fence that we have there, we're going to get a 12-foot chain link fence and just leave it at that to satisfy the FERC requirements and security, and not do any of this other, compatibility and compromising that they're seeking to do. They can do that, right?
Absolutely.
So you're saying they haven't gone far enough?
One of the problems
Actually, I
that,
don't think they can do that, because he said there were two options for a fence. One of them's not chain link.
if I may, that's the two options they chose. The federal government hasn't said they can't put a brick wall up. That's the two options they chose.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Let me tell you, we have another problem here, and unfortunately, and maybe somebody in planning, or certainly Mr. Barry can tell you this, that prior to Transform Baltimore, there used to be a screening provision in the zoning code. And I went through the process of dealing with Transform Baltimore. And we were the community that had the most input in that zoning code. This little teeny David, we did it. We got a lot of things changed because we're a very unique neighborhood because of our old industrial history and our one-story industrial buildings and our row homes. And back then, if you were within 200 feet of an industrial commercial property, there was a screening requirement. Of course, BG&E ignored that. It was one of the battles I didn't take on, although I took on some of the other companies and did get their property screened. But lo and behold, after being promised by the planners, there is no screening provision in the zoning code except for in the landscape part which only deals with, if I'm correct, new or redeveloped properties. So and I'm going to tell you that I personally will take on that fight to get screening back into the zoning code. So we're going to put up a palisade fence that has no screening, which is going to, in the end, not comply with zoning code once it's changed to be what it used to be.
Okay.
Because screening is an important
We
part.
can't speculate as
I
to
know that,
where,
but screening.
when, and how you think you can get the zone.
Okay.
So why don't, can we stick
Okay.
to the fence that we're here for today?
Screening has always been an important part of the community as it relates to our neighbors who are industrial and commercial. It has a history. You were required to screen. There was a reason for that, and this property should be screened. The only reason that I can't say that you have to is because the planning department messed up, although they won't acknowledge that. So we know that screening is an important part because that's our history, and yet they've offered us no screening whatsoever with that palisade or that other look-through fence. That's why we wanted a brick fence. It accomplishes the screening. And I don't care if it's a chain link or a palisade or the other one. They're all do nothing for us as far as the beautification of our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Mary Ann Kondratenko, Kondratenko. I live at 2207 Huntington Avenue, and I live directly across from the main gate. So I've been there since May of 2010. Initially, I was complaining. I was calling the customer service at BG&E, complaining about the noise. One from the hum, the loud hum that you get, and the other was from the trucks that would idle outside.
Excuse me, ma'am, do you know why the trucks are idling outside?
What we were told at the last meeting that we had, where BG&E came, I think it was our land use committee, they were saying that the trucks are basically staging themselves. If there's like a crisis in the area, they would go there and sit and wait in case they have to go into the substation. Or they were waiting for someone to come and unlock the gate, but from what I understand, anyone can unlock the gate. They don't have to wait for a supervisor to come and unlock the gate. So I'm not really sure what the reason is, except that the last explanation seemed to make sense to me, that they're...
Business purpose associated with the trucks being there.
Right. Yeah. But in turn, the vibration from these big trucks, even like the little bus shuttles that come up, if they sit in front of your house and idle, it actually, you hear the rumbling. It actually vibrates your windows. It's such a low rumble from these trucks. And I have, over the years, many a time gone out and knocked on their window and asked them to turn their engine off. And they do comply. But you're snugly in bed, and it's like, do you want to go down and go out of the house and knock on the window and ask them to turn their engine off?
What would change about the level of noise due to the idling of the trucks with the replacement of a 12-foot fence?
It wouldn't change anything. That's why we had asked if they could change their main gate location to 23rd Street. There's actually a third possibility for a main gate, which is off of Hampden Avenue, if you go back to that map. And we formally asked them at our last meeting with them if they could look into changing the main gate to the Hampden Road or Hampden Avenue entrance. So that's industrial on both sides right there, and any trucks idling would not be bothering residents at that point. But even if they put a new fence up, once they enter the yard and the trucks idle, or they have their music up loud, it doesn't change the fact that the noise is coming from the trucks. My thought was it would be nice to have a brick fence because it would certainly muffle a lot of that noise coming from the trucks that are right inside the gate or the fence. That's why I had proposed or really wanted to have a brick a brick wall. But the fellow was talking about the sound baffling, and they could just do the uprights with the cement inserts. My question is, that was not presented as an option for the outside fence. If that wouldn't require a footer, and there are already holes there where the chain link fence is anchored into the ground. What I'm asking is, can we look into that as a possible option? Because that certainly would help with any additional sounds in the yard. It would help with also beautifying the neighborhood. We could put murals there. But most of all, it would help with the sound. I gotta go back to my notes. They were talking about the turning circumference of the truck. So I've been there and I've seen a lot of cranes come, but I've never seen any big equipment that had to turn into that yard. They always stage the huge, like, low boy, because I've seen it. It's high on the ends and it's low in the middle, and it has the big piece of equipment. It's always been just sitting outside of their yard, and the crane comes next to it and picks it up and puts it in the yard. So I don't understand. I mean, maybe down the road there may be an occasion where 20 years from now something breaks and they have to bring something in the yard. I don't know.
Are you willing to allow your power to be off until they do that?
I don't believe my power comes from them.
Okay.
But, you know, we lose power. We have planned outages all the time, and we have unplanned outages. It's just a crapshoot. I'm sure it would be fixed within a reasonable amount of time, and I would be satisfied with that.
Reasonable amount of time for huge powers out.
The last meeting we also had with BG&E, they also did say, when they were talking about all the lines under the ground, that it would be an expense, too much of an expense. It wasn't that it was too extensive. Well, I guess they did say extensive, but they did mention that it was expensive. But again, beautifying the neighborhood, and we just got like 8 new tree pits cut from my side of the road. But again, I can't have any trees on their side. And I even proposed to be able to have trees on their side, but further down, away from the fence, so they wouldn't have to cut the tree down in case they had to turn some big vehicle in there that needed to get in there, but we were told no. And years ago, when the road used to be a one-way street, when it was one-way, there was parking on both sides. It went to a two-way street with no parking on that side of the road. And it is proposed that the street is being turned into one-way again, and that is on, is it Transportation Planning Director? Desk to be approved. But again, it really is the sound. And they have done, I have to say, they have talked to their people, and it has gotten better. The trucks have are idling less, but at night, I don't think the men really get that they have their windows down and they have their music blaring. And it is a problem for the neighbors. And then the talking that goes on, especially when there's a big crew. It's not just business. I mean, there's some camaraderie going on, and they're laughing and, yelling to each other. And you hear all that. And that's, again, why I was advocating for a block or cement or brick fence. But
How long have you lived there?
10 years.
Has the substation always been there? Was it there when you moved in?
Yes.
And you've had that noise issue since you moved there?
Yes. It gets worse and it gets better. It depends on the weather. It depends on the, I knew that I was moving in across from a substation. But there are times when the fans on top of the buildings start to go bad, and it's this horrible screech. And, you keep calling. Now I have Fabiola's phone number. We have a direct line that we can get things done more quickly when these type of things happen. That's about it.
All right, thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Ryan Flanagan. I'm here representing the Greater Remington Improvement Association. I'll be reading our statement and addressing a few points that came up from the earlier testimony, and can answer any questions y'all may have from our community perspective. The Greater Remington Improvement Association is opposed to the BGE's BMZA request. We have been meeting with BGE representatives for over a year now, or about a year now, and proposed new fencing and community concerns about BGE substation, about the community's concerns about the substation in Lower Remington. GREA asked for 4 things: the construction of a masonry fence on the residential and business side facing portions of the substation along Huntington Avenue and 23rd Street, restoration of parking on the west side of Huntington where there currently is none, relocation of the main entrance for utility vehicles away from the residents facing Huntington Avenue, and the installation of tree pits along Huntington Avenue. Later, we also asked BGE to verify sound levels on the property, as neighbors believe them to be out of line with city noise regulations. Over the course of this year, BGE representatives have knowingly lied to GREA representatives about the possibility of all these different solutions. We were told that BGE had no other property in Maryland that has a masonry screening wall, and no BG&E, Constellation, or Exelon facility in the country that has a false facade. In our document we've submitted, you will see pictures from both national and local. There's the Paca Street substation, and I believe there's one in Ridgely's Delight and one in Seton Hill, both that have, again, sort of architecturally embellished masonry walls that are conform with the neighborhood aesthetic and conform with the aesthetic of our entire city, which is brick facades.
Are you familiar with the timing of the construction of?
Yes, I'm aware that they were put in at the construction type, or I can't verify that independently. I've been told they were, and I understand that, and I think that now we have a chance to correct the historical mistake that was putting in this substation without those ensuing walls, and I think that there's something to be said for, when you look at the overhead view, you do see a mix of industry and residential in Lower Remington, which is true of many of our neighborhoods. And I think that, I can't speak to why that decision was made in 1955, not to give Remington sort of the best presentation of a substation, but it was not made, and I think we have an opportunity to correct that.
Well, just to follow up on that, were any of those facades, as they exist now, built in 1955 when the substations were constructed, if you know? I mean,
I'm sorry, I don't know. No, as I know, this was built in 1955. Like I said, I think we just have an opportunity to make that right now. We were also told that it was impossible to attach Palisade-style fencing proposed in the application to masonry walls, where we said maybe you can do masonry in some places, palisades in other, and we were told by representatives that's impossible, that can't be done. We did our own independent research, we contacted the manufacturer of the fencing, and they said, of course that can be done. Here, go look at our website. Here's an example of this being done as a further sort of evidence of the continued degradation of trust that in this process that BG&E has knowingly undertaken. Second, we were told that by BGE representatives that parking cannot be placed on the west side of Huntington Avenue because emergency work would require immediate access to the entry on Huntington Avenue. BGE provided auto-turn data, that's the software that models the turning radiuses of vehicles, documents demonstrating that a special wide load vehicle all but a special wide load vehicle would be capable of making those turns on Huntington Avenue. They claim that a wide load vehicle is still the reason to permanently restrict this parking. However, any such delivery would need to be planned and permitted and require temporary parking restrictions on the other side of the street as well to facilitate this turn. When they presented this data to us, showing us the auto-turn data, it was a pretty appalling moment. They told traffic engineers on our board, on our land use committee, that the data they were looking at for the auto turn was not what they saw. That's saying, here, it says that all but the largest trucks can make it, and they said, look, the turn can't be made, and we said, clearly that's not what the data shows, and they told people with this professional knowledge that that was not the case. 3, BGE failed to analyze our relocated entrance proposal, which would allow for any direct entry off of 23rd Street, moving it away from the residential entrances on Huntington. And 4th, we were told by representatives that tree plantings were not permitted along any exterior walls at the time, And if you refer to the pictures of Packet Street in your packets, not in the packets, but in our letter, shows that there are small trees immediately adjacent to the walls at existing substations. Fifth, we were told on several occasions that there is not a noise problem and that neighbors were probably hearing other things. Later, BGE confirmed that their sound was violating current noise regulations, and that neighbors suggested and will take corrective action to insulate that, and we appreciate that. Bottom line is, as a community association, GRIA, we are not an oppositional association. We have worked very hard to allow for responsible, continued growth in our community. It is, in fact, I have testified before many boards in this room to approve things going forward. This is the first time I have stood in opposition to a project in our community, and I hope it's the last. But we have to today say we unanimously and outright oppose BGE's getting this variance. The degradation of trust is the main issue. That while yes, there is a variance issue that's talking about just a fence being raised, but the point of your board is to balance the interests of city life. There's always competing interests, and when we see one group sort of refusing to give anything on their side, how are we to react? We have all, everyone standing here has given tremendous personal time, effort. We're all here on volunteer time. That is our contribution to this. The things we do for this community are as much as we can do as residents, and we ask every business around, every stakeholder in our community, from the highest level to the lowest level, to give a little extra so that we can have a more vibrant community. And almost everybody has met us in that challenge except BG&E. So we see not just residents doing that, but it is literally like Lower Remington is the focus of city-state attention through whether it's zoning.
We're getting pretty far from a 12-foot fence here.
Well, let me just make my final point is that all actors, all stakeholders in this community share a vision for the neighborhood that shows that will not always just be an industrial area. It'll be a greater mix of residential. The industrial spaces you see now will probably one day occupy mixed-use buildings. So that just because now we're talking about the height of a fence, that maybe it just seems like it's a 6-foot variance, we're really talking about a step that will allow the continued growth and vibrancy of our community and our city, and that BGE does not share our vision for a more vibrant Remington and a more vibrant Baltimore is really galling. We are asking them to take a step, to add additional funds, to take that leap, but it can be done. Brick walls all over the world are built and conduits are moved every day. It's an engineering challenge, but it's not an impossibility. We're just asking them to take the additional step, which will be met by every actor in the city. We're just asking them to be there with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jed Weeks, also with the Greater Remington Improvement Association. I'm also on the Land Use Committee. Sorry I was a little bit late, so I don't have a lot to add beyond what Ryan said. But I was present at every single meeting over the past year.
I'm sorry, but this witness hasn't been sworn in.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
All right, right, Andy. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name, please.
Jed Weeks, Greater Remington Improvement Association Board and Land Use Committee. So over the past year, my frustration really is about the fact that we've been lied to. And I've worked with folks in this room who have never lied to me, like Mr. Barry, and we've worked together on lots of amazing things. I don't have a problem with anything that they've done in this process. In fact, I think they've tried to save it, and it's been really appreciated. But BGE has lied to us time and time again over the past year, completely. And every single time we challenge that lie, they say, oops, it's a mistake. For example, saying that they had no masonry fencing on any property in the state of Maryland. I already knew when I asked that question if they had it. And they do. They have it on Pocket Street. They have it in many areas. And they told us they did not. And I clarified that. And I said, are you sure? And they said, yes. We do not have that anywhere in the state of Maryland. And then when we presented them evidence of it, they said, oops, we misspoke. And then they moved to it's just because of the footers. And then we said, well, don't you have to put in footers for this other type of fence? Oh yeah, but it's for the conduit. So it's been this slippery slope argument the entire time, which is incredibly frustrating. Same issue with the parking, with the auto turns and all of that stuff. This is a WB60. You told us a WB60 is the vehicle that you bring in. Oh, actually it's a lowboy. Well, a low boy requires restriction of parking on both sides of the street. Well, that's true, but, so every single argument that we have had, or every single discussion we have had, they have deliberately withheld information, withheld options, and been a terrible community partner. So I can't trust anything they are saying in this process at this point. And that's why I think we just need to sort of nuke it and start over. And that's exactly what happened on that Paca Street facility, which was in 2007, to answer your question. That was a BGE-owned property that was not yet a substation. And BGE was like, we're gonna put a substation in this property. And the community said, what's it gonna look like? And they showed it to the community was not satisfied, and they had a long debate. The former planning commission chair, basically, he has this famous quote where he was like, if you don't come here in a week, like basically hugging and kissing, that I'm gonna, design the fence myself. And they came together with the community under that ultimatum, and they came up with that masonry fence. And it's a great product for the community that everyone was happy with. And I hope that we can do something similar like that today, instead of just saying Remington doesn't deserve it like these other neighborhoods.
Okay.
Mr. Weeks, I had a quick question,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. If the board only had the authority to approve or disapprove a height, if the board had no authority to move entrances, if the board had no authority to tell anyone what the type of material of a fence be, should the board approve this appeal based purely on height, between 6 feet and 12 feet?
I believe it should, and I want to be clear that I'm not even sure it is maybe not this board's role, but what I am trying to say is that we had no opportunity for community engagement with BGE at all without the presence of this board, right? This is our opportunity to basically say our piece about a bad community partner and put it on the record. So that's what we're doing.
Understood.
Thank you. Counsel? Two quick questions for you. One, can the main gate be changed? And two, is the technology, can you use the sound barrier technology to put up a fence, a solid fence around this property?
Very good questions, and I did hear those points, and I think to answer those in testimony format, Mr. Comfer can speak to that
Okay.
directly. So I will call Mr. Comfer back up to the stand. John, let me ask, you heard some testimony about a couple things, and you've heard some questions by the board. First, with regard to the gate, as you know, there's a gate on Huntington and a gate on 23rd, and then there's been comments about the Hamden Avenue entrance. Can you speak to both the gate on 23rd and the gate on Hamden, and whether or not those two can take the place of any use of the one on Huntington?
The gate on Huntington is wider access. The gate on 23rd has electrical reactors on each side of the driveway. And the gate on Hamden is the third option you mentioned, which is down further, actually would have to be regraded, and there would have to be some movement of buildings to allow any large equipment to come through there.
Okay, what about on a day-to-day basis, though? You've heard complaints about trucks sitting and idling on Huntington. Have your crews been, or are you in the process of trying to establish a habit where there's no more use of Huntington on a day-to-day basis?
We are, yes.
And how is that being implemented?
Each business unit that has a need for access to the substation it's been communicated to them, and it's also been communicated to the distribution crews to not stay on the Huntington side, to actually access from the 23rd Street side.
And are you aware if there will be effort made to continue with that through the use
That will.
of the supervisors?
Mhm.
Okay. Are you aware of the communications between GRIA and External Affairs?
Not.
To some extent. Do you know who Fabiola is? She was
I do.
referenced earlier. I want to make sure, since she was not a witness, do you know who Fabiola is?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
And is it your understanding that Fabiola and her group will continue to work with GRIA and with any kind of complaints that come up to communicate to you directly on the habits of the crews and whether or not they are still creating a nuisance on Huntington?
Based on the communications I've heard here today, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
With regard to the sound wall, can you explain the difference between the sound wall that's going to be put up around the transformer and the security fence, and whether the sound wall could take the place of the security fence?
Or technology similar to the sound wall?
So the sound wall, as Chuck mentioned, is a piered foundation, which are cylindrical or square. And the wall for a brick foundation around the facility would have to be a spread foundation, which is the full length of the wall.
You said for a brick wall.
Correct. Or any type of, yeah.
So why couldn't you put the sound wall as a wall around the facility?
Would it be helpful to have
It would.
Mr. Rayburn speak to that?
It
Okay,
would.
let's have Mr. Rayburn speak to that.
Let me first say that over most of this year, we spent a lot of time and effort with third-party engineers to try to come up with a solution to the problem you're faced with here, trying to put a wall, a masonry wall, some sort of solid wall. Sargent and Lundy, Shiner Associates, we have these reports with regards to trying to use a pier type wall, which is what the sound barrier will be. Try to do that out on the road. The problem is where the location of these duct banks running not perpendicular to the property line coming into the plant. A number of them run parallel down the fence line. So in order to sink piers where that is, I'm going right through the duct bank. Now back where the transformer sits, the source of the noise, I don't have that. They come in perpendicular. I can span that with piers on each side and then set the panel in there.
Are the piers longer in length than a fence pole? Because you do, you have
Yes,
penetration.
absolutely, absolutely. That's the other factor in this engineering, is the wind loading. The sound barrier will not have as significant wind loads as a solid wall that runs 500 feet with some breaks for gate, but that wind load on that wall requires substantial foundation. I mean, very substantial foundations that we can't do it with where all the duct banks are.
This is a safety and security issue, basically.
Yes.
Securing the site, and the only way to do it is by doing it that way.
The only way that we found to do this is to follow the standard that FERC has set and use the materials that are being used for this throughout most of the country. And that fence, because as you've seen, is not solid. It doesn't have the wind loads and what have you on it. So it can get by with a much less foundation for a fence post than what it takes for a large pier to support a large sound barrier, which is dense and stops all wind.
Okay.
A couple other quick things, Chuck. You've heard talk about screening. Does the Palisades fence have a mesh behind it that will assist in screening?
It has a mesh so that you will not be able to reach through. It is a mesh that is a louvered mesh. It's that allows wind to pass through, so we don't have that wind loading that I speak of. But it gives you a bit of a opaque transparency. You can see through it. I'm not going to deny that you can see through it.
What about landscaping on the inside? Over the past few months, have you learned through your investigations in response to the concerns raised whether landscaping can be placed on the inside of the proposed security fence?
Early on, we investigated the possibility of plantings inside the fence line. I think because of the underground, we couldn't do it. And I mean, Mr. Confer is the expert on that station and the equipment. But all I can tell you is that we looked at that option. And that's why we, quite honestly, to disguise the station, to screen it in those terms, it would be better done out at curbside. So that's why we came up with the planter boxes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Unless there's any final questions, I'll make a very brief closing argument.
Thank you.
In general, I know on behalf of BGE that they would like to apologize. It's not been a smooth process, and like I said, there's been a lot of lessons learned. I think, in all honesty, a lot of what's happened is a lack of understanding when the questions are asked and when the information's given, engineer talk versus layperson talk. And again, it hasn't been perfect, but in no way, has BGE ever tried to lie. And in fact, this has been, I think the end result, a positive one, in that the group now does have a conduit through external affairs, and things are definitely improving. I think you've heard a lot of detail on why they've been confused and frustrated, and we've tried our best to explain this situation. But at the end, I do just want to close with that I need to make it clear that I want to try to kind of decouple all the issues with regard to what they've asked for to mitigate maybe what the look they're not happy with the actual variance we're asking for. At the end of the day, we're asking for a taller fence. That is something they need to do to secure the site. That's the variance. Everything else has been, the side issues are very important, and BG wants to work with the community, but they are separate from the actual variance. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much. All right, next case, 2018-216, 3214 East Baltimore Street. Good afternoon. Let's get you sworn in.
Raise your right hand, please. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Great.
Ms. Lewis?
I'm Miss Norris, yes.
Name, sir?
Mark Lewis.
Mark?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, we have this to use first floor as restaurant, is that correct?
Yes.
And do we have any staff reports?
Yes, thank you. Planning Commission reviewed this application originally back in July, and at that time, the zoning code required that for a property to qualify for a neighborhood commercial establishment consideration, the property had to be originally constructed and used for non-residential purposes. Therefore, at that time, the Planning Department's recommendation was approval if the applicant could provide the board information indicating the premises was originally constructed and used in part or in whole for a non-residential use. Since that time, the zoning code has been amended to allow for substantial alterations of an original residential structure, which is what this property is. And therefore, at this point, the Planning Department is in a position to recommend approval of this application. Thank you.
Anything else? Great, tell us about your project.
Okay, so we're, my husband and I are proposing to open a day cafe and bakery at 3214 East Baltimore Street, and basically selling baked goods and possibly a few sandwiches, things like that, juice, coffee, tea. Internet has seating inside on the first floor where the living room area is.
Okay. The restaurant is first floor only?
Yes.
Okay. And I understand in 2018, there was a permit issued, Mr. Baumgartner, for a single-family dwelling?
Correct. Did that permit only apply to the second floor, or did that permit apply to the entire structure? In other words, was the ground floor ever actually rehabbed into a single-family use?
So I purchased a home in 2018, in February of 2018. So it was all the permits and everything had already been done prior to us moving in. So there's been no additional construction or anything done since we've moved in. We did go to permits, and their information was just on the rehabbing of the structure after there was a fire there at some point. So it was just renovated to be a residential property.
So when you moved in, it was totally a residential property?
Right. But historically,
right.
And that's where the zoning or the council bill says that you have to have evidence that it was prior zoned as a non-residential permits construction, or historical evidence of a lawful non-residential use. So that's what we have is the information regarding the non-residential use. So we prepared 2 packets, didn't have a lot of them, but it just has some information, so I'm not sure if you guys want to take a look at it. But in there, originally when we received, when we came down in July, there was a letter given to us, it was to Mr. Dirk Bomberg.
That's me.
Okay. So the letter stated that we needed to prove that it was originally constructed for commercial usage, which it wasn't. But it also referenced the Sanborn map. So in that packet is a copy of the Sanborn maps, 1936, which shows that the property was designated as a commercial property. Also in there is a 1947 copy of the Chesapeake and Potomac, oh, sorry, it's 1944. Chesapeake and Potomac listing as the house as White Star Cleaners. Next, we would have the 1984 listing for the residents, stating that in the remarks section, which I highlighted, it states that the live where you work, this space is zoned for business. There is currently a dry cleaning establishment that has been there for 65 years. The owners have lived and worked there the entire time. This location would be ideal for offices as well as retail space located on several major bus lines.
It's on this sheet if you're looking for it. It's a MRS.
Additionally, there was a zoning card. So when we went to the zoning board, they suggested that we get zoning cards. But when we went to the zoning office, they only had one card, which is listed, or which is in that packet. And it shows approval, or no, a filing from 1976 and approval for a snowball stand in 1975. But there was no cards available showing that it was ever permitted or that a zoning was ever issued. So we went there on 4 different occasions trying to talk to different people, and we went to the archives and everything, but there was only that one card, which is in there, showing that it was filed for a dry cleaners, but never anything stating that it was issued. In addition to that, we have an ad from the Baltimore Sun from 1920s showing that there was a pin setter ad from the residents. Then we have, there was previous use. So in 2016, it was used as a doctor's office. That packet is in there. The physician's assistant was named Sarah Busey. And the next is a letter from the community association. So we've been to our community association meetings. They are in support of it. There's a letter from the, I'm not sure the gentleman's title.
Alex Schwartz. You talking about him?
Yes.
Alex Schwartz. He is
the chairman of economic development. So they've been reaching out to us to see if they can assist us in the process to get it there. Like I said, our neighbors are enthusiastic. We've talked to neighbors up and down the street. They've been asking us what's been going on with the process. The sign was up in July. We took it back down and put it back up. So they've been encouraging. And the last time we were here, some of the neighbors actually came down, but they weren't able to make it this time. In addition to that, we have a menu, a company overview, pictures, and schematics of the residents, and that's basically all that we have for it.
All right.
Well, you did some research.
I was going to say,
Tried
nice
to.
job. Any questions from the board?
No.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we will hear from you?
You will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, couple
Yes.
housekeeping. 2018-387 will be postponed until December 11th.
Okay.
Also, 2018-388 postponed indefinitely.
Thank you. Okay, next case is 2018-266, 4214 Mortimer Avenue. Jamal Harrison Bryant.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, stand up. My name is Emerson Dorsey, Tidings of Rosenberg. I'm counsel for the empowerment.
Let's get your client sworn in.
Okay,
Raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
And we have this to use portions known as A, B, and C for offices. Is that correct?
That is correct, and we're here on a request for
Do we have any staff
reconsideration.
reports before you get started?
Yes, the Planning Department has reviewed this application. The lot is largely used as a paved parking lot. This is property in an I-1 zoning district where offices are supposed to remain secondary to the principal use, which apparently at one time was warehousing. The application proposes to use the property only for offices, which would technically be a new non-conforming use of the property, unless the offices were legally established as of the effective date of the zoning code, which was June the 5th of 2017. The department has no objection to the application if the applicant provides information showing that office use of this property was lawfully established as of June 5th of 2017. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Dorsey?
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to do this more as a proffer, and I'll have Dr. Bryant here answer any questions about the Empowerment Temple. Dr. Bryant's the pastor of the Empowerment Temple, which is the owner of the property. We're here on a request for reconsideration. We were here in August, and I think there was some I'm going to say maybe some misunderstanding or maybe the lack of communication. The Empowerment Temple acquired this property from BG&E in 2015. It had been BG&E's training site. They used it for other uses, some of it going back to the early 1900s. On that property, which is a little more than 6 acres, there are 3 buildings on it. We weren't, the request is to use those buildings for offices. Those were offices and training offices that BG&E used during that period of, during the time of their ownership. But the primary, we're not using the property primarily for offices, just the buildings for the offices. So when Empowerment Temple acquired the property, their plans were always to use those buildings for offices, classrooms, other uses related to its main sanctuary, which is on Primrose. It kind of backs up. It's actually adjacent to the property. From the Mortimer Avenue side, it's kind of back. It's back from the property. So with the Empower Baltimore change in 2017, the plans were in place to use those buildings for offices, but it was never in the sense to use the property as primarily for offices. No new buildings, nothing else will be placed on those buildings. Since shortly after Empowerment Temple acquired the property, it's been used as a parking lot. It has 408 parking spaces on it. It will continue to have 408 parking spaces on it, even with the change of use. Parking lot is a permitted use in this zoning district, in this zoning classification. So any office use would be secondary to their primary use. They're going to also be using the buildings for training purposes, a permitted use under the I-1 zoning classification. So you will have primary uses that are permitted. The current use is a primary use that is permitted. So the offices would be secondary to both the parking and to the training uses on the property. So we, as part of the reconsideration, like to again, provide some clarification as to the nature and use of that facility, of that parking lot.
Okay. So they're used as, have they been, just to make sure I understand the fact, have they been continuously used since, as training offices?
Right now, like I said, they were continuously used by BG&E as training.
Right.
Right now, they are not being used as training by Empowerment Temple. But again, training, commercial training facility is a permitted use in the I-1 zoning classification.
So it went from, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it went from training by BG&E to training by the church.
Well, that is one of the uses for the buildings on the property. Again, we're just really talking about the use of the buildings. There's 3 structures on the property that desire is, and like I said, they've been used, I'll say they've been used as offices since Empowerment Temple's on, because they use it for storage and other, they have furniture, other things in those actual buildings. But to use those offices, as offices under the current zoning code, not as a primary use, but I'm going to say as a secondary use, is something that is a conditional use by the board, upon approval of the board.
Okay.
So under the current zoning code, offices in an industrial district, they can be allowed under two avenues. Number one, they can be secondary to a primary industrial use, which I don't think this property would qualify under kind of that avenue. But the second step is that they can be, continue to be used as offices if they were used as offices prior to the enactment of the code, the new code in 2017.
That's correct.
So are you going under that second step?
We're actually, I'm going to say, because I'm not really sure what an industrial use is.
It's a good question.
When it is a permitted use under the code. And a parking lot is a permitted use in a I1 zoning classification. So in that instance, when roughly 94% of the surface area of the property is a parking lot, a permitted use under the zoning classification, this would be secondary, clearly, to that permitted use.
You had also touched upon these, I don't even know what to call them, they're just small little one-story buildings.
One's a two-story building, but.
Got it. The commercial training schools, for example, are by right permitted in
They
the
are
zoning.
permitted, right.
And I can recall from the first hearing on this,
Right.
that was one of the many uses that were
That is correct.
proposed into
That is correct.
So both the parking lot and the vocational training schools would be allowed by right. You wouldn't even have to.
They do have to be here.
So I presume then there's another office component, and that's why you're here today.
And that's why we're here. That is.
It's not just the commercial training school.
That is correct. There will be offices that the church has plans for, not only for some of the offices for use by the church, but they want to do some community activities that office use would be. The plan is for a wellness center, health center, for offices, not a health center, not a mini clinic or anything like that, but for doctor type or physician type offices, which is a plan for the center, as is again, except training, vocational training, computer center, those types of things, and I can let Dr. Bryant speak some more as the plans for that particular facility for that center.
First, good afternoon to all of you. We are, Mr. Chairman, really backed in. Our sanctuary holds about 2,500 people. We maximized it for worship space. As a consequence, most of my staff has to do virtual offices and don't have a place to function and operate, and we want everybody on campus. So the office that you're talking about really is for our administrative staff as well as our staff to be able to be community liaisons with the greater Park Heights community.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
2018-361, 122 South Haven Street, Jorge Diaz. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Jorge Diaz.
Let me get you sworn in first.
Raise your right hands, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
That be true.
Great. And Mr. Diaz, we have this to use portion of premises as office, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And staff reports.
Thank you. Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that this property is zoned I-1, similar to the appeal you just heard. However, this property was last authorized, according to records available to the department, for use as a single-family dwelling or a row house dwelling, which is technically a non-conforming use in the I-1 district. The I-1 district requires that office use be secondary to a principal industrial use of the property. And the department therefore recommends approval of the application only if the applicant can provide information demonstrating that there is a current industrial use of the property to which the proposed office use could be secondary. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz?
Down here, really know speak English real well, and got my son with me to help me up, possible to.
Yes.
Yes, state your name, please.
Oh, yes. My name is Josh Diaz. I am his son. So yeah, we're well informed that we need to make the office a secondary use. So he proposed that we have like storage for our boxes because we have a business. It's called Municipal Express. It's shipments to Central America with cars and boxes, stuff like that. So we're proposing that we have. May have a bunch of pictures here if you guys like what.
Okay. Can
So,
you?
like,
Sure, if you'd like us to make this part of the record.
This is the picture for the place right there. Got 2 rooms.
So that's the 122 South Haven, and
Got 2 rooms. The front door, the front room is I want to I propose make a store, like a gift shop, and
like a storage for boxes. We have like boxes that we have there for like for wholesale as well.
So, wait a minute now, so you want to use the first floor as a retail gift shop? So you'll sell
the
things?
front room. You got 2 rooms, front room and back room.
He said one part of it would be a gift shop, while the other area is like specifically for the offices of like the motorcycle.
Well, I think the problem that we have, and we heard a little bit before, is it's got to be, your office has got to be secondary to an industrial use, and a retail gift store is not going to get you to an industrial use. So you need to tell us a little more about what you would use for an industrial use.
I really don't understand really well for industrial, but in this case we propose like a store with shipping supplies and.
Mr. Diaz, if I can interrupt real quick. As part of your submission, there was a document you submitted called NVOCC Agency Agreement. Is that correct? In that agreement, it's with Cartainer Ocean Line, Inc. and Morazan Express, and Morazan Express LLC is your company, correct?
It's correct. It's correct.
In the zoning code, section 1308C provides a definition for industrial maritime dependent. In that definition, under 2 inclusions, it says facilities associated with marine terminals for the storage or intermodal transfer of goods transported in waterborne commerce. That is in the section which provides definitions for different types of uses. I bring that to the board's attention since if the office is secondary to an industrial use, and the code provides for an industrial maritime dependent definition, which includes a use of a business that for goods exclusively transported in waterborne commerce, that could be interpreted to kind of give that primary industrial use coupled with the office use. The retail goods portion is something that the board could consider as accessory to that broader business. I bring those up as merely points, and the board can decide whether or not that qualifies as an exception to that general rule.
So let me ask you the question, is you heard what Mr. Baumgartner say, is what he described going to be the primary use of this building?
Yes. Like he mentioned the gift shop, and like he might have just like misinterpreted. Like that might have been the reasoning why he needed to make in order for it to be approved. But then yes, that's in reality the office is to be used for like the Cartainer like agreement that we had with them, and specifically for that.
Okay. And so you're here today for an office that will be secondary and used to an industrial use. You're not here today for a gift shop because that's not what.
Not really. Not.
That's not the primary issue.
Okay. Okay.
It's like storage. Storage.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
None.
All right. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Let's see, where are we? 3018-386, 420 Crescent Street.
Please raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great.
Mr. Barakis?
Barakis, yes.
Mr. Alexander Poole?
That's right.
And we have this to install a new 150-foot tall telecom pole on grade, with on-grade equipment and an 8-foot high perimeter fence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Staff reports?
Yes, thank you. Planning Department has reviewed this application and is recommending approval subject to these conditions. The panel antennas and related equipment will remain mounted as illustrated in plans and elevations submitted to planning, and the applicant will adequately mitigate any adverse effect as specified in the report of the Historical and Architectural Preservation Division of the Department of Planning in accordance with that report's recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, and are those conditions acceptable to you?
Yes.
Okay, good. Tell us a little bit about your project.
Sure. T-Mobile will be the anchor tenant on this tower. They have an agreement with the tower owner to install at the Top Rad Center, so this will not be a speculative tower. It's located in an I-2 zoning district surrounded by other commercial and industrial zones, and with one residential zone to one side. There is a tree buffer between that residential zone and where this tower will be located. This will not change the use of the property as it is existing. It'll be a secondary use. T-Mobile will locate their equipment inside of the fenced compound on grade, and there'll be additional space for future carriers should they choose to co-locate on this structure. So that's the brief description of it. I can answer any questions that you guys have if you have any.
And the height of the fence is due for security reasons?
That's right. Yep, to secure the equipment and to make sure that no one is in the compound putting themselves or the equipment at risk.
Okay. Any questions? No. Good. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
2018-389, 1723 Gwynn Falls Parkway, Vernon Holmes.
Good afternoon, Board.
Good afternoon.
Justin Williams from the law firm Rosenberg Martin Greenberg on behalf of the applicant, Vernon Holmes Jr.
Let's get Mr. Holmes sworn in.
Raise your right hand, sir. Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do.
Mr. Holmes, we have this to use as 3 dwelling units, is that correct?
Yes.
Great. Staff reports?
Thank you. Planning Department has reviewed this application. The Planning Department is recommending approval of the application, subject to the condition that the applicant provides 2 parking spaces in the rear yard of the property. This property is approximately 21 feet wide, therefore can provide those 2 parking spaces. There is an accessible alley in the rear. Thank you.
And Mr. Williams, are those conditions acceptable to your client?
Yes, they are.
All right, tell us about your
So I'll
project.
proceed briefly. I know the board's had a long docket. This is actually an application not for variances for a 3rd dwelling unit, but basically for the board to confirm the non-conforming structure that has always had 3 units in it. I've given you a packet of materials for your review showing the location of the property near Mondawmin Mall and the Mondawmin Transit Station, subway, bus line. Most significantly, I've included a zoning summary card showing the property had a permit history going back to 1967 for 3 dwelling units. If you were to testify, Mr. Holmes would confirm that the property still has 3 meters for gas and electric and other utilities. And he agrees to the planning department's conditions about parking. There's a garage in the back that can be used for 2 parking spaces.
Okay. Any questions from the board? No. No? Great.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, and you might as well stay right where you are.
Right.
2018-390, 819 North Fremont Avenue, Vernon Holmes.
Again, for the record, Justin Williams from the law firm Rosenberg Martin Greenberg on behalf of the applicant Vernon Holmes Jr.
And Mr. Holmes, we have this one to use as 4 dwelling units, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Staff reports?
Planning Department has reviewed this application and has no objection. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. So Chair, again, this is application for the variance is necessary to convert the former and now vacant basement level of the premises at 819 Fremont Street to use, from commercial use to a 4th dwelling unit on the property. I'll go through some exhibits with you in the file, and Mr. Holmes is here to answer any questions the board may have. Mr. Holmes' background, he's the CEO of Uplift Individuals in Christ, INC. Uplift Inc. is a faith-based social services organization that works to provide a holistic wellness and social services to adults experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. One offshoot of this program has been to acquire properties in distressed neighborhoods and upgrade them and use them as assisted living facilities. So there's an example in your file of a rehab in North Rose Street. Another offshoot of his program is to just acquire distressed homes in neighborhoods and provide low-income, affordable housing to low-income individuals. This isn't like homeless services or government work. It's just he provides low-cost housing to people who need it. So this is the property he's acquired in support of that mission. I've included in exhibits aerial photos showing the property and street view photos showing where it is in the Upton neighborhood. It's about 4 blocks south of the Upton Metro Station. You can see on Fremont Avenue the property. The street view photo also shows the adjacent properties. 3 of them have been demolished. And going back to the aerial, shows there's been a lot of home demolition in the area. I've included also in the exhibits for your review the National Register of Historic Places registration form showing the property in the area is historic. It's known as a premier African-American neighborhood for Baltimore, going back to the late 1800s. There's a number of unique properties in the area. The excerpt I included shows that the Lafayette Square Park, which is around the corner from the property, was used in the Civil War by Union soldiers. So it goes back and shows the historic nature of the area and what Mr. Holmes is trying to do to bring back some of the missing and lost vitality and charm in the area. I've included a zoning card for the property showing that as early as the 1960s, the property's been used as 3 dwelling units with commercial use in the basement. And then in 2008, this board, or the prior members of the old makeup of the board, approved variances necessary to use the property for 4 dwelling units. So basically, we're here for the same exact application as was approved previously in 2008. Included also in the board's, in the file handed out, is the floor plan showing the new unit in the basement, which was formerly commercial space, which would be used as a rental space, with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and kitchen. Based on the zoning cards, the property has already been legally established non-conforming structure, which can be continued. The applicant, Mr. Holmes, would invest about $30,000 to upgrade the building in the rear. It's not historically provided automobile or bicycle parking, so variance is necessary for those as well as the additional unit. As Mr. French's report would indicate, the lot area variance necessary for this is a 16.2% lot area variance, and the parking variance would be for 100%. But again, like I said, the property is not historically provided parking. I've included also, finally, as an exhibit, an excerpt from the Maryland Law Encyclopedia explaining how the principles of res judicata apply in zoning hearings. So the board had previously found that a variance for 4 units could be approved here. The board should also follow those principles and the findings made by the board in 2008 to find that a variance here is appropriate. In the outline I've given to you in the front of the exhibits in the files, it goes through all the standards the board should consider to grant the variance approvals. I'll just go through the highlights. That this is the area subject to the demolition of many vacant homes and vacant lots. The applicant here is proposing to provide habitable space that would be affordable to tenants. The basement would otherwise be unproductively used as a commercial space in this area, given the level of vacancy in some of the demolished homes in the area. So the variance would be granted here and be a benefit to the community, particularly given how close it is to both a long CityLink bus line and the Upton subway station. Okay, there's no, the property is not in an urban renewal plan area, not within CHAP district, and the planning department does not object to the application. For those reasons, and because the 2008 board granted these approval 10 years ago, we request the board grant the approvals again for a fourth dwelling unit.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
No. No, sir.
Thank you very much. 2018-393, 1401 William Street, Mateus and Anjos. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, everybody.
Get you sworn in a second.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great, state your name for the record.
Mateus Anjos.
Okay. And then we have this to construct a 3-story front addition with second and third floor side bay overhanging sidewalk, third floor middle addition with second and third floor side bay overhanging sidewalk. Construct second floor rear addition with second floor side bay overhanging sidewalk and rear and rooftop decks.
Correct.
And I believe, Mr. Baumgartner, that description has been amended?
That is correct. And the applicant can go into that in terms of the revised plans, which don't impact the, they basically create a new height variance, a very minimal height variance. But the other changes don't impact the other, don't impact the degree of variances requested under the rest of the application.
Okay, before you get started, let's have staff reports.
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so basically, the property that we acquired has fallen apart. The roof has caved in, and when we went and did our initial analysis of what was needed for the property to be restructured, we noticed that the walls outside the exterior being built were not built correctly. They used interior brick to build the exterior wall, and you could see that by some of the bricks popping out and basically coming onto the ground. And what we understood was that in order for us to get this project done correctly would be to basically demolish the whole building and start from scratch, so it would be new construction. With that being said, when I went down to the city to find out more about the property, I found out that on the 1400 block, this is one of the most narrowest lots on the property. And in order for us to build the structure that we want to build, we need to make sure that we can actually increase the size of the floors above. What I did was I looked at the properties adjacent to us. I went into the city and looked at what they did. Some of them were subdivided. That's why we came down with this idea. I wanted to subdivide this property initially, but because of its narrowness, we were not able to do so. And that's why we asked to increase the height of it a little bit so that we can get the square footage we wanted. That is what is going on in that location, Federal Hill, Locust Point, and that's why we have that increase.
So the amendment to the description is the height?
Yes, sir. And also the bump outs, as you mentioned.
And the bump outs?
Yes, sir.
So the height, you're at, to the top of the building, you're at 35 feet 6 inches?
I think we were at 32, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look at the,
Am I looking at the
unless
wrong
it,
thing?
I think they changed it. That's right, they did change it, that's right. They did increase it to 35. It was at 32, it went to 35 because what we wanted to do is maximize the rooftop deck. Considering the length of the property, it was only going to a certain degree. We wanted to maximize a little bit more and so they can use the rest of the roof.
So I'm looking at this on the drawing, I'm looking at a 42-inch parapet wall. So let me make sure I understand that. So that parapet wall will start at the roof line and go up 42 inches?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Initially, if you look at...
And let me finish my thoughts so I understand. And that, does that parapet wall wrap around the front of the building?
Yes, we want to increase the front as well so that we can match the properties on the street next to us and going down the block.
Okay. Okay.
So what you're proposing will be in line with the neighboring property?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
it wouldn't be like higher or?
No.
From the front, it would look?
No, ma'am. Just a little history, the 1400 block is actually one of the highest points in Federal Hill. And for us, we're a corner lot, so I don't have any obstruction. So I don't need to go any higher than the properties because there is no property in front of us. So once we put the rooftop deck, and actually the neighbor actually let us go into the house when we first met him, and he walked us up there. From his property, which is the one right next to ours, you can actually see the skyline, which is what we're trying to do as well. So we don't have any issues there.
When you say rooftop deck, are you actually going to deck there, or are you going to just use the roofing surface?
We're gonna do a little bit of deck and the rest roofing surface. Because like I said, of the narrowness of the property, we wanna actually put some of our machinery up there as well.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, we can't put it anywhere else. And if we basically try to put it anywhere else, it could be an issue, a nuisance for the community. So I'd rather put it somewhere where people don't see it.
Will people be walking on the roofing material?
To a certain extent, yes. Not the full length of the roof,
What
but
are
to
you
a certain extent, yes. I'm sorry?
What are you using for material?
Didn't get that yet. I'm working on the material for that. I don't know exactly what the roofing material will be, but it'll definitely be something that's comparable to permits.
The revised plans show a height, including the parapet wall, of 35 feet 6 inches.
Yes, sir.
So 35 feet is permitted by right in this district, so it's that 6 inches of parapet wall going above that 35-foot maximum that require the height variance. And I'm sure that you know this, but all those bump outs, all those, over the public right-of-way require minor privilege permits.
Yes, sir.
And when this board doesn't control that particular permit process, but those will be required prior to
Yes, sir.
any UNO being issued.
Yes, sir. The engineering company working with us on these drawings will help us with that.
Any questions?
Good.
No? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And that concludes our docket for today.